Awesome. So Carly Rose, today we're talking about neurofeedback for OCD. So let's just start with a very simple definition. What is neurofeedback?
Great question. So neurofeedback is a very non-invasive brain training experience. And so what it does is placing electrical wires on the brain, non-stimulating ones, that are measuring the brain wave activity of a person's brain and is looking at various potentials of how that patterning is showing up. With training, what it's doing is essentially an electronic version of operant conditioning. It is reinforcing what parameters we set for the training protocol, because each brain gets a different training protocol. So if we are setting a protocol for calming, the brain is going to fire the way it's going to, and the machine is going to watch that firing, and every time that your brain doesn't fire to make you less calm, it gives you feedback. So it conditions the response wanted versus the response unwanted. And after time and consecutive training sessions, we then see people shift from doing, I'm only going right, to now being able to go left, or to now have more choice making in the matter around how their behaviors and their symptoms are showing up.
Awesome. Okay. So why would someone use neurofeedback for OCD?
So neurofeedback is not a newer therapy. Its origins stem from like the 1970s, I believe. And it's always been this sort of like outside kind of alternative form of mental health therapy. And very useful, obviously, in brain injuries and, performance enhancing. But coming back to why would someone want to do this other than, traditional OCD treatment, is that oftentimes the way that things show up in the brain, as we're talking about OCD, it is hard to talk about. There are challenges around how to verbally express their experience around their OCD themes, whether it's a shame experience, a guilting experience, or the distress just feels too big. It allows the person to offboard that verbal expression and be more in tune with how what they're experiencing in their mind is showing up and how they're feeling it in their body, and how then they can control it just by focusing in on a screen. So for some people, it may be more palatable of treatment when it comes to OCD. As we know, OCD can be extremely distressing, as well as shameful, as well as debilitating. And oftentimes people can feel very defeated that how can I make sessions, talk, express myself when my mind is at war with itself. It sort of takes that guesswork out of it and allows the person to do an autonomous treatment to better understand how their patterns and their experience is showing up for them.
Awesome. Wonderful. So where in the brain does OCD live?
So that's a great question, kind of like that silver bullet. And we won't know until we get what's called a qualitative EEG brain mapping to take place for the person. So everybody has a brain, but our brains all work differently. And where our symptoms and challenges lie can be in different brain structures from one person to the next. So knowing that OCD comes down to a lot of stress anxiety and stress energy, we're going to focus on the parietal lobe and the limbic system, and specifically going into the brain of the structure of the amygdala. So think your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn experience to a stressor. So oftentimes when we're doing brain mapping with OCD, we can see it kind of more so in excess frequencies that are taking place back here in the back part of the brain. We can also see that more obsessional quality to OCD be more forward in the brain of the frontal lobe and the dopamine reward center. This is where the obsessional experience of OCD comes into play, where people are having a hard time letting go of something. They're overthinking, they're ruminating, they're catastrophizing. So it's like this weird relationship between I feel something and then how do I process it? So some people can feel something and get through it, But with OCD, we feel and then we overthink. And this bounces back and forth from parietal lobe to frontal lobe, thus making the experience feel very stuck. And so a lot of OCD clients I've worked with have expressed, like, I feel like I'm at war with myself and my brain. Mm-hmm. And so when we scan those brains, we see these sort of excess energies, more faster frequencies taking place in the back of the brain as well as within the front of the brain. All in all, it boils down to, what does your qualitative EEG look like? And from there, we create protocols and we look into those specific areas of dysregulation to target first. And as you target, you peel back the onion layers. And you then can find more of that root cause of that more specific question, where does it live in the brain?
Awesome. So I, as you know, am an individual with OCD and ADHD. Mm-hmm. And no, again, I know you don't have my qualitative EEG, but if you had to guess, as a neurofeedback specialist, what would you imagine my brain map would show?
I would have to venture a guess that there is likely an excess of beta. So beta is a faster frequency, roughly from 13 hertz to about 19 hertz. That's a little higher beta, but it's a faster frequency. And so when we think about the brain, we want slower frequencies in the back, think rest and digest. We want faster frequencies in the front, executive functioning, planning, problem solving, and the like. With a brain with someone who's struggling with both ADHD and OCD, we would tend to see more excess beta frequencies back here in the parietal lobe. And we would tend to see either slower frequencies in excess in the front, ADHD experience of not being able to regulate around stress, do the executive functioning, problem solving. We may see some slower excess up front as that relates to ADHD. Oftentimes, when you first scan a brain, the whole brain looks to be one or another color. So I talk about colorations as being faster, red, slower, blue. But it's all about what do you have in excess and what is also deficient. We obviously don't want a deficiency of fast waves in the frontal lobe. That could tell a story of gosh, it must be hard to problem solve and work through experiences. At the same time, we don't want faster frequencies in the back of the brain because that can translate into anxiety, fear, feeling freezed, feeling fighty, feeling flighty. And so with your brain, one could posit that there's dysregulation in those frequencies, and it's going to show up on the surface as being probably a whole total coloration. As we train, that coloration moves. Mm-hmm. And as it moves, it tells the story. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people that I've worked with in the past, they come in and they have, quote, a blue brain. Mm-hmm. So with those folks, we could say, are you sleeping at night? Do you have apnea? What is your water intake? What's your nutritional intake? Have you had a concussion? As we train those areas, we start to see more colorations popping through rather. Mm-hmm. And it can shift and move. So a raw brain scan usually shows more coloration with excess faster frequencies because, anxiety. And that's going to show up more in the back part of the brain as it relates to OCD and the fear state in the amygdala. We can also see it in the front of the brain if it is a symptom problem that you are challenged with around overthinking, rumination, and feeling like you can't make a decision.